Forests can be peaceful, quiet escapes from the chaos of the world, but they can also be places where when people step in, they never come out. Sometimes they're found in a bad state, and sometimes they're never found at all. And either way, in the cases we're covering today, no one knows what exactly went down out there. Welcome to Scary Mysteries. Here are the top 5 creepiest forest mysteries that remain unsolved. Number 5. The Great Basin Murders. They call it the Great Basin, a sprawling, empty expanse of high desert and mountains stretching across Utah, Nevada, Idaho, and Wyoming. It's a place of long, lonely highways, dimly lit truck stops, and wide open nothingness where it's pretty easy to just disappear without a trace. And between 1983 and 1997, at least 9 women did. Some were found dumped along interstate exits. Others were buried in snowdrifts, left on remote hilltops, or posed grotesquely in death, arms and legs spread as if in some ritual display. All were murdered. Most were essayed, and for a long time, investigators believed one phantom predator was stalking the highways here. They called him the Great Basin Killer, but the truth turned out to be even darker. On February 17, 1983, 23-year-old Janelle Johnson was hitchhiking from Denver to Riverton, Wyoming. A truck stop in Sinclair, Wyoming was the last place she was seen alive, and 2 weeks later, her body turned up in Fremont County, and she'd been assaulted, strangled, and then buried in a shallow grave. A storm runoff had eroded the dirt, which exposed her body. Investigators found bite marks on her shoulder and DNA samples that could have been the key to her killer. However, a refrigerator malfunction destroyed that evidence, and so Janelle's murder remains unsolved to this day. 5 years after that one, 18-year-old Lisa Kimmel was driving from Denver to Billings in her black Honda CRX with the personalized plate Lil Miss, and she never made it. 8 days later, fishermen found her body in the North Platte River near Casper, Wyoming. Now, she'd been beaten and stabbed, her wrists and ankles tied together. The medical examiner determined she'd been kept alive for nearly a week before being killed. So what she endured in that time was no doubt a torturous experience. For years, her case sat cold until 2002, when DNA identified her killer as Dale Eaton. A search of Eaton's property uncovered Lisa's car, buried 6 feet underground. He was convicted in 2004, but suspicion still lingers that he may be connected to other Great Basin murders. In March of '89, 19-year-old Vicki Perkins vanished from Portland, Oregon, and 2 months later, her skeletal remains were found in Utah's Emery County near I-70. Now, she'd been known to hang around at truck stops, offering her services, which made investigators suspect a trucker might be responsible. The one name that kept coming up was Scott Cox, a long-haul driver linked to 2 other murders under his belt, but no hard evidence ever tied him to Vicki. In '89, Patricia Walsh and her husband, Douglas Ikoski, left Seattle to hitchhike cross-country. Within weeks, both were dead. Douglas's body was found in Texas. Patricia's wouldn't be identified for over a decade. It turned out both of them were not victims of Dale or Scott, but they had been killed by Robert Rhodes, a long-haul trucker with a torture chamber built in the back of his rig. Now, Rhodes admitted he killed Douglas almost immediately after picking them up, and he kept Patricia captive for a week before murdering her and dumping her body in Utah. There was Ermelinda Sherman, who was 32, found shot in the head in St. George, Utah in 1991, and her killer was never found. And Barbara Williams, found in Salt Lake City that same year, murdered by her own husband, Howell, as it turns out. And in March of 1992, a frozen body surfaced in Bitter Creek, Wyoming. Investigators nicknamed her Bitter Creek Betty. Beaten, strangled, and finished off with an ice pick to the skull. In 2005, she was finally identified as Irene Vasquez, missing since 1990. In November of '93 brought another horror, Shafter Jane Doe, found near I-80 in Nevada, posed in a crucifix shape. Beaten, shot twice, and left with no ID. Forensic tests suggested she spent her last months in Star Valley, Wyoming. And in August of 1997, 18-year-old Tanya Tesk's nude body was discovered in Yukon, Idaho. She too was known to have traveled with truckers, doing her thing to make ends meet. Witnesses saw her with 4 older men before her death, but none were ever charged. And so as you can see, over the years, the idea of a single Great Basin killer unraveled. DNA and confessions revealed multiple predators were hunting these highways, each using the vast empty landscape to cover their crimes, drawn to the business of trucking for the cloak it provided them. Pick up someone here, kill them over there, and dump them somewhere else, all while performing a job and dropping off their goods at their intended destinations. The murders stopped after the arrests of Eaton, Rhodes, and Baldwin, but the Great Basin is still there, in 200,000 square miles of desert, mountains, and blacktop. Maybe some of the killers are in jail or dead, or maybe they're still out there, driving those same lonely highways, just looking for their next victim. Number 4. The Bedgebury Forest Woman.
In October 1979, the body of a young woman was found by a horsewoman riding through the forest. The victim had been battered and her face was badly mutilated. There was no handbag, no identification, and virtually nothing to go on.
It was late October 1979 in Kent, England, the kind of crispy autumn day where the air feels slightly smoky and sunlight filters through the thinning canopy of Bedgebury Forest. Now, this sprawling 2,600-acre public woodland was quiet except for the clip-clop of hooves moving along a narrow trail. A woman on horseback guided her mare through the undergrowth, enjoying the solitude until something caught her eye. Not far from the trail, lying gnarled in the bush, was a shape that didn't belong. As she got closer, she could see the flesh and realized it was a dead human body. There was no accident here and nothing peaceful about the scene. This victim lay out in the open, not buried or hidden, with her body showing signs of a brutal beating. The weather here had been dry for weeks, so the forest floor was hard, dusted with brittle leaves. A heavy blood-stained wooden stake lay nearby, and later this was confirmed to be the primary murder weapon. Investigators would determine she'd been killed up to 5 days earlier. Her head and face had been so badly damaged that identification by sight was impossible. She carried no bag, wallet, or ID with her. So who was she, and equally as important, who had done this? The forensic portrait sought to give her the best chance of being recognized. She was a petite woman, about 5'1", with straight dark brown hair and brown eyes. She was thin, in her early 30s, and wearing secondhand clothing. Black shoes, a yellow blouse with a black turtleneck, and a distinctive homemade black and white floral dress, crafted from furniture fabric, altered more than once. Police believed it was the kind of garment someone living in poverty might wear. And there were troubling medical findings as well. She had an ectopic pregnancy, meaning the baby was developing outside the uterus. Ultimately, the baby would never come to term. She was 4 to 6 weeks along, though, and internal bleeding because of it would have caused her severe pain. So, was the pregnancy perhaps a motive? She had stretch marks on her stomach, suggesting she had given birth before. Her teeth told another story, too. Worn molars, prominent decay, and no sign she had ever visited a dentist. But her lungs were clean, no nicotine stains, no city smog deposits. She was likely from the countryside, perhaps a drifter or hitchhiker. Detectives theorized she might have been moving between towns along the nearby highways, and some suspected she could have been working as a lady of the night in London's Spitalfields area, but still no missing persons report ever matched her. And posters went up across the UK and Europe. Doctors' offices and hospitals were contacted in case a woman had come in with pregnancy-related pain. Even Crime Watch aired her case in '84, focusing on her unusual dress, asking the public to help trace its origins. One woman did come forward. She said she had donated that dress to a charity shop in Eversham, Worcestershire. From there, though, the trail went cold. Nearly 20 years passed before forensic science gave life back to the investigation. In 1998, new DNA techniques were used on old evidence. Tiny traces of blood, invisible to the naked eye, pulled up a match to a man already on the police's radar. Harry J.R. Pennells, 73-year-old retired lorry driver from East Sussex. And Pennells had actually been questioned back in 1979. The witnesses remembered him with a young woman matching the victim's description just days before the murder in both Kent and Yorkshire. It seemed like the police may have finally found their man, and the thought was that Pennells had picked her up in London's Spitalfields Market and driven her north for delivery, then back south before killing her in Bedgebury Forest with that wooden stake. But Pennells had an answer for everything. Yes, he'd picked up a hitchhiker, and maybe even that woman, but he claimed he dropped her off alive. 4 weeks of testimony couldn't convince the jury otherwise, and so in May of 2000, after just 75 minutes of deliberation, Pennells was found not guilty. To this day, no one knows who the Bedgebury Forest woman was, who loved her or who mourned her, if anyone did at all. Her murder remains unsolved, and her grave marked only by the memories of those who stumbled across her story. Number 3. The Disappearance of Joe Keller.
The Cleveland community continues to support the family of missing teen Joe Keller. Keller disappeared during a trip to Colorado a few months ago, and he hasn't been seen since.
Clocaenog County, Colorado. It's a stretch of rugged mountains, rolling meadows, and remote dirt roads that feel 100 miles away from anywhere. It's the kind of place where cell service disappears, the air is thin, and where 19-year-old Joe Keller went for a run and never came back. July 23, 2015, Joe Keller was visiting a private ranch near Antonito, Colorado, with 2 childhood friends from his hometown of Cleveland, Tennessee. The boys had grown up together, sharing classrooms, family vacays, and more recently, the challenge of keeping up with Joe's athletic lifestyle. He was an avid runner, a swim coach, the kind of kid who volunteered his Saturdays at the Salvation Army. That afternoon, Joe and his friend, Colin Gwaltney, decided to go for a run in the high country air. They set off together but soon split, Colin taking one road and Joe another. It wasn't unusual. They ran at different paces and planned to meet back at the ranch in time for dinner. But when 2 hours passed by and Joe still hadn't returned, the easy pace of the day turned to panic. At first, friends and ranch staff retraced the paths they thought Joe might have taken, but there was no sign of him anywhere. As night fell, search crews spread out across the countryside, and over the next several days, helicopters, search dogs, and volunteers combed the rugged terrain. Investigators couldn't say for sure if Joe had gotten lost, been injured, or if he came across the wrong person. The area where Joe vanished was vast, dotted with abandoned structures, thick stands of trees, and long canyons. With no witnesses to say which way he'd actually gone, it really was a guessing game. Back in Tennessee, Joe's parents, Neil and Cindy, refused to give in and did what they could. They helped keep his story alive through the Find Joe Keller Facebook page, posting updates and photos, and rallying thousands of supporters across the country. And Joe had been planning to return to college that fall. He was supposed to have his whole life ahead of him. But as the seasons changed in Clocaenog County, the trail stayed cold. Nearly 11 months later, in July of 2016, a hiker moving through the backcountry stumbled upon something no one wants to find: human remains, partially concealed by the elements. The clothing matched what Joe had been wearing the day he disappeared. An official confirmation would take months, but Joe's family didn't need the paperwork. On Facebook, they posted, "Although it has not been officially confirmed, we know that Joe has been found because of his clothing and description. We thank you all for your continued prayers, kind words, and concern for Joe and us over the 11+ difficult months. What exactly happened to Joe out there is still a mystery. His skull was fractured, and the location of his remains suggests he may have fallen from a cliff or steep slope. In the thin mountain air, maybe he pushed himself too far, collapsing or fainting before the fall. Some mysteries never make sense. Sometimes they strike when an adventurer like Joe steps into unfamiliar territory. But whatever the cause, one truth remains: the loss of someone you love is devastating. Number 2. The Disappearance of Thelma Melton.
Polly Melton loved the mountains, and in 1981, it would be the last place anyone would see her.
On an early fall afternoon back in 1981, the rolling hills of the Great Smoky Mountains were quiet along the Deep Creek Trail in Bryson City, North Carolina. This was familiar ground for 58-year-old Thelma Melton, a place she had hiked dozens of times before, but on September 25th, she would walk these woods for the very last time. And the strangest part, she didn't just vanish into thin air. She walked over a hill in plain view of her friends and was just never seen again. And Thelma lived in Jacksonville, Florida, but she and her husband often traveled in their Airstream trailer to Bryson City for no other reason than to spend some time in that beautiful national park. And that day, Thelma was walking with 2 friends along Deep Creek Trail, an easy, scenic 1.5-mile path that followed the water's edge through a canopy of oaks and maples. It was the kind of trail where you could just walk side by side, talk about life, and let the afternoon pass by. But sometime after 4 p.m., something changed. And Thelma, who had been walking at a leisurely pace, suddenly picked up speed. Her friends watched her move ahead, climbing a hill on the trail. She turned a bend, disappeared from view, and that was it. When they rounded the bend and still didn't see her, well, no big deal. They expected she had simply gone ahead to the campground where their Airstream was parked, a short walk away. When they arrived to it around 4:30, her husband was inside, but Thelma wasn't there. In fact, he hadn't seen her since she left with the group earlier that afternoon. Still, though, no one panicked. She knew the trail, was experienced, and there was nothing to suggest trouble. But when 2 hours passed with no sign of her, worry set in. Her friends reported her missing to a park ranger around 6 p.m., triggering a search. The rangers, other campers, and bloodhounds, they all went out looking, but there was no trace. Thelma had just vanished without leaving behind a single clue. She didn't have much on her, no cash or ID. She had her pack of smokes, but no medication, and she wasn't physically capable of straying far from the trail. Her disappearance seemed even stranger when investigators looked at her last 24 hours. The morning of September 25th had been completely ordinary, except for one thing. Thelma normally volunteered every day at a local senior center, serving meals to elderly residents. That day, she skipped it, and telling nobody why. The day before her disappearance, she also made a phone call from that center, something her supervisor said she never did. No one knows who she called or what they talked about, but given what happened shortly after, it's worth noting. Thelma's husband told police she had struggled with bouts of depression, especially after the recent death of her mother. She had used Valium frequently in 1979, but supposedly stopped by 81. After she went missing, he noticed that his own prescription was gone. Did she take the pills with her? And if so, why? Her minister added another strange layer, and he suspected she might have been having an affair. There was no hard evidence to back that up, but if it were true, could it have been connected to her disappearance? Did she really run off like that to start another life? The official theories range from a sudden medical event to a deliberate walk away from her current situation, but the park's geography complicated things. The Deep Creek area is well traveled and hikers were all over the place that day. If she collapsed or had fallen, the search team should have found her. If she left the trail on purpose, She did it so quickly and quietly that not a single person noticed. And then there's the darker possibility that someone was waiting. In the end, there was no evidence of foul play and no trail of belongings and no answers. 40-plus years later, Thelma Melton's case remains one of the Smoky Mountains' most baffling disappearances. Number 1. Clocaenog Forest Man. Deep in the dark pine woods of North Wales lies Clocaenog Forest, a sprawling 40 square miles of twisting dirt roads, silent glades, and shadowy trails. For years, this was a place of outdoor adventure, hiking, hunting, and the annual Wales Rally GB race. But in 2015, two brothers stumbled on something hidden under moss and leaves, something that had been waiting there for over a decade: a human skull. And with it, one of Britain's most enduring unsolved murder mysteries. It was the evening of November 14, 2015. Andrew and Mark Middle were camping out in the forest for the Wales GB. The roaring engines of rally cars zipping by had gone quiet for the night, replaced by the crackle of their campfire. Mark then wandered into the trees with a torch, looking for firewood to keep the flames going. The beam of light swept over the undergrowth and caught something pale. A rounded shape, marked with spots of green moss. He bent down, thinking maybe it was a stone or a chunk of bone from some long-dead animal. But as he brushed away the moss, he realized the hollow sockets staring back at him weren't from a deer or a fox. They were human. At 8:35 p.m., police were called. A local officer arrived, took one look, and knew the brothers likely stumbled on the scene of a murder. The skull indicated trauma, and fatal blows from something big and heavy had cracked holes into it. The location was unnervingly close to two forest roads, meaning whoever left the body there didn't have to carry it far. Just pull on over and drag him out there. And what's particularly interesting to note in this case is that just yards away from this victim was the site of another infamous killing, the 1995 murder of Edward Carthy, the youngest victim of serial killer Peter Moore. Now, what are the chances Moore then had something to do with this? I mean, of all the spots you could stop and drop a body, is it a coincidence they both ended up here, or are they connected? Moore himself, from behind prison walls, would claim the new victim had been found in exactly the same place as Carthy. And for the next 5 weeks, among the thick, wet undergrowth, investigators found almost the entire skeleton, scattered but intact. The forensics confirmed what they had thought. The man had been struck in the head with such force he likely died instantly. His body had then been dumped there sometime between 1995 and 2005, left to rot as the forest quietly grew over him. Clocaenog Forest Man was likely born before 1950, over 54 years old at the time of death, and probably in his 60s. He was well built, standing between 5'8" and 5'10", but his skeleton showed signs of a hard life. Spinal injuries, arthritis, and fused vertebrae that would have left him in chronic pain. His nose had been broken at some point, and his left wrist possibly damaged. His teeth told the most intriguing story. All his back molars were missing, suggesting years of poor dental care, until suddenly his fortune seemed to change. In later life, he'd received extensive high-quality dental work, including crowns on his front teeth and a rare specialized procedure to repair a temporary crown. Police thought these details could be the key to his identity. They even published his dental profile in professional journals, hoping a dentist might recognize their own work. Nearby, police found a dark green Pringle sweater and decomposed dark red Marks & Spencer underwear. The sweater had been made between 2000 and 2004, the underwear in 1999, but it was never confirmed that these belonged to him. They could have possibly been abandoned by someone else entirely. A DNA profile was extracted, but no match turned up in the UK database. Police released facial reconstruction showing what he might have looked like at ages 50, 60, and 70. They also began familial DNA searches, hoping to find relatives. And then came a bizarre twist. In 2017, that serial killer, Peter Moore, reached out from prison, claiming he knew exactly who the man was, a mature student from Aberystwyth University who'd gone missing in 1996. Journalists suspected he meant a man named Roger Evans, but the dates didn't line up and police ultimately dismissed the lead. In the years since, leaflets have been handed out at rally events, appeals made to Dennis and the public, but the Forest man remains nameless and his killer unknown. Somewhere out there, someone knows who he is. Maybe they remember a man in his 60s, stocky, with a crooked nose and crowns on his front teeth. Someone who vanished without explanation in the late 90s or early 2000s, and hopefully they someday come forward. So there were the top 5 creepiest forest mysteries that remain unsolved, and that's going to do it for today's episode. Go check out more of our videos and enjoy a good binge, and we have lots more mystery in store for you. Stay safe out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you over in the next one.